I really didn't want to get married, but...
We only got married because Gammy was crying.
He built a multi-billion-dollar empire on a megawatt grin, the untouchable king of Hollywood. Behind closed doors, however, and live before millions, Will Smith was quietly breaking. For decades, he unraveled over one person, Jada Pinkett Smith. From the public humiliation of the entanglement to the career-shattering Oscars slap, their marriage felt more like a psychological thriller than a romance. Now, in the summer of 2026, a massive $3 million lawsuit threatens to drag Will into court, exposing the darkest layers yet. How did Hollywood's golden couple become one of its most baffling tragedies? And how much of Will's pain was really about Jada, the lawsuit nobody saw coming? Here's where the story starts, and it's not with a viral clip. It's with a sworn legal filing. In December of 2025, a man named Bilal Salam, also known as Brother Bilal, and by his own description a close friend of Will's for nearly 40 years, filed a $3 million lawsuit against Jada. Not against Will, against Jada, alleging intentional infliction of emotional distress. Now, if the name Bilal Salam sounds familiar, that's because you have likely heard it before. This is the same man who made headlines back in late 2023 after appearing on Unwind with Tasha K and making explosive allegations about Will and Jada's private lives, including claiming he'd witnessed Will in a sexual encounter with actor Dwayne Martin years earlier. The allegations spread like wildfire online, but the Smiths wasted no time shutting them down. Will's representative called the claims completely fabricated and unequivocally false, while Jada dismissed them as ridiculous and nonsense, saying they were part of a money shakedown. Fast forward to today, and that same man is now locked in a courtroom battle with Jada that's threatening to pull Will right into the middle of it. According to the complaint, the trouble traces back to September of 2021 at a private birthday celebration for Will at the Regency Calabasas Commons. Salam alleges that Jada approached him in the lobby with several members of her entourage, grew verbally aggressive, and demanded he sign a non-disclosure agreement. When he refused, Salam claims she threatened that if he kept talking about her personal business, he would end up missing or catch a bullet. He also alleges someone from her team followed him to his car, continuing the threats as he tried to leave. Salam claims things escalated further after Will's Oscars slap in 2022, when he says he declined to help manage the fallout, and again after Jada allegedly learned he was writing a memoir of his own that referenced the Smith family. He claims she responded by launching a smear campaign against him. Jada has firmly denied the allegations, previously calling similar claims nonsense in a 2023 interview, and her attorneys have argued much of the lawsuit targets speech that's legally protected. That argument worked, at least partially. Earlier this year, a California judge agreed with Jada's team and struck several of Salam's claims under the state's anti-slap statute, a law designed to weed out lawsuits that target protected speech. As a result, Salam was ordered to pay Jada roughly $32,800 in attorney's fees. You'd think a partial legal defeat and a five-figure bill might slow someone down. It didn't. So if Jada already won a chunk of this case, why is the fight only getting bigger? Because in July, Salam made a move that pulls Will directly into the middle of it. The push to depose Will Smith. On July 7th of this year, Salam, representing himself in court without a lawyer, emailed Jada's legal team with a request. He wanted Will Smith to sit for a deposition, to testify under oath as part of the case. Jada's lawyers did not take it well. Their response, laid out in court filings, was blunt. There is nothing to meet and confer about. They pointed out that Will is not a party to the litigation and, as of the filing, had not been served with any subpoena. Under California law, forcing a non-party like Will to testify requires formal legal procedure, not an email request to opposing counsel. But Jada's team didn't stop at rejecting the deposition request. In separate filings, they accused Salam of submitting late responses and failing to produce sufficient evidence to support his own claims. And they filed a motion to compel, demanding he turn over recorded communications related to the threats he says he received, along with medical records to substantiate the emotional distress he's claiming cost him $3 million in damages. As of the most recent filings, no subpoena has been served on Will Smith, and the court has not ruled on whether his testimony will actually be required. The next hearing in the case is scheduled for August 19th, where the parties are expected to address both the fee dispute and the ongoing discovery fight. So will Will Smith actually end up on a witness stand, testifying under oath about his wife and one of his oldest friends? Nobody knows yet, not even the court. But here's what makes this whole legal mess even stranger. While all of this was unfolding behind the scenes, Will and Jada's public story about their marriage was quietly shifting in a completely different direction. The living arrangement that doesn't add up. In March of this year, in a public conversation, Jada described her and Will's living situation in terms that sounded firmly, permanently separate. She called the arrangement of living apart fantastic. When asked whether they'd ever move back in together, her answer was carefully non-committal. Eventually isn't tomorrow. Then, in July, a very different account surfaced. According to a report citing an inside source, Jada actually moved back into the home she shares with Will roughly 2 years ago, meaning sometime around 2024. Not recently, but quietly, long before her March comments about eventually isn't tomorrow ever aired. The source described the two as happy and still committed to supporting each other, even while maintaining what's been described elsewhere as an unconventional arrangement, with Jada reportedly keeping her own separate even after moving back into the family home. So which version is true? Was Jada speaking honestly about a separate life in March, only for reporting to surface an entirely different living situation months later? Or has the actual arrangement simply been more layered and private than either version fully captures? Two people, technically separated since 2016, who've spent years drifting between distance and closeness, depending on the season of their marriage. Either way, it raises an obvious question. If this marriage has been this hard to pin down for years, was there ever a point where Jada wanted the marriage part of it at all? I never wanted to be married. This is, without exaggeration, one of the most quietly explosive things Jada has ever said about her own life, and she's said it more than once. Back on an October 2018 episode of Red Table Talk, sitting alongside Will, their daughter Willow, and her mother Adrienne, known to viewers as Gammy, Jada told her family, on camera, that she never actually wanted to be married, not to anyone, including Will. She explained the full story behind it. She got pregnant with their son Jaden back in 1997, and under pressure from both Will and her mother, who both felt strongly that marriage was the right thing to do given the pregnancy, she reluctantly agreed to a wedding she didn't actually want. She has described her own wedding day using one word: horrible. She's said she cried the entire way down the aisle, not out of joy, but because she felt pushed into a traditional, formal ceremony when what she'd actually wanted was something small and private. That wasn't a one-time confession either. Jada has returned to this same point in interviews since, making clear it wasn't just an emotional moment on a talk show, but a genuine, long-held belief. In one cover story, she put it about as plainly as a person can. She adored Will deeply, but adoring him and wanting to be his wife, in the traditional sense of that word, were two completely different things for her. She's said she doesn't fully believe in the institution of marriage, or the expectations that typically come bundled with the title of wife. Instead, she's described their relationship as something closer to a life partnership, built on freedom rather than ownership, the idea that neither of them owns the other, and that real love doesn't require it. So here's the question that reframes almost everything else in this story. Every single one of Will's public tears over this marriage, and there have been plenty, happened inside a relationship that Jada has openly said she never wanted in the first place, at least not in in the traditional sense. Does that make his tears more heartbreaking? Or does it explain, more than anything else in this entire saga, why this relationship has looked so different from the outside than it apparently feels from the inside? Because to really understand those tears, you have to go back to where the public first saw them, 6 years before any lawsuit existed. The entanglement revelation. It was July of 2020, and nobody was ready for what was about to happen at a Red Table. Red Table Talk had already built a reputation as the show where the Pinkett Smith women said the quiet part loud. But this particular episode wasn't about celebrity guests or trending topics. It was about Jada sitting across from Will, finally addressing the rumor that had been swirling for months, her relationship with R&B singer August Alsina. Jada didn't dodge it. She sat there, composed, and used a word that would end up in headlines for years afterward: entanglement. She explained that during a period of separation from Will, a time when the two were technically living apart and figuring out whether their marriage even had a future, she had gotten involved with Alsina. Alsina himself had already gone public, telling an interviewer that Will had given him what he described as a blessing to be with Jada. Jada, for her part, pushed back on that framing during the Red Table Talk sit-down, but the word entanglement was already loose in the world, and it wasn't going back in the box. But here's the moment that actually broke the internet. It wasn't Jada's confession, it was the reaction shot. As Jada worked through the details of what happened with Alsina, the camera cut to Will, and what viewers saw looked unmistakably like a man on the verge of tears. His eyes glistened. His face had that particular stillness people get when they're trying not to fall apart on camera. Within hours, that clip had been separated from its context entirely and turned into one of the most reproduced reaction memes of that entire year. Except, and this is where the story actually gets interesting, Will says that's not what was happening at all. In the aftermath, once the meme had already taken on a life far bigger than the actual episode, Will addressed it directly. He posted a video responding to the frenzy, and he later revisited the moment in his memoir, released in 2021. His explanation was almost aggressively unglamorous compared to the internet's version of events. He said he wasn't crying in that specific frame at all. According to Will, he was running on almost no sleep. He'd been shooting late nights on a film project, and his eyes were watering from a combination of raw exhaustion and dehydration made worse by however much coffee he'd been using to stay upright. He wasn't denying that the conversation was heavy. He was very specifically pushing back on the idea that this exact viral frame was some kind of live, on-camera emotional collapse. So, which is it? Was America watching a man's heart break in real time, or watching a sleep-deprived actor's eyes water from caffeine and exhaustion while sitting through one of the most excruciating conversations of his marriage? Maybe the answer is both. Things can be true at once. But if you thought the entanglement fallout was the peak of Will crying in public over his marriage, you'd be wrong. Because 2 years later, an entirely different kind of breakdown was coming. And this one had nothing to do with sleep deprivation. The Oscars slap aftermath. March of 2022, the 94th Academy Awards. And in the span of about 10 minutes, Will Smith went from beloved Hollywood veteran to the center of the biggest live television scandal in decades. Chris Rock, presenting an award, made a joke referencing Jada's shaved head, a detail tied to her public struggle with alopecia. Will got up, walked onto the stage, and slapped Rock across the face in front of a live global broadcast. He returned to his seat and, according to widely circulated footage, shouted at Rock to keep his wife's name out of his mouth. What happened after the slap is where the tears come in. Cameras caught Will back in his seat, visibly shaking, clearly overwhelmed by what he had just done in front of the entire industry and a worldwide audience. Reports from that night indicate Denzel Washington and Tyler Perry moved in to console him in the immediate aftermath, quietly urging him to let it go before he was due back on stage. Because here's the twist nobody could have scripted. Less than an hour after slapping a man on live television, Will Smith won the Best Actor award for his performance in King Richard. He walked up to accept it, and what followed was one of the strangest, most emotionally chaotic acceptance speeches in Oscars history. Tears, a shaking voice, an apology to the Academy delivered in the same breath as a defense of what he'd just done, framed as protecting his family. The fallout was swift. Will resigned from the Academy days later. He was banned from Academy events for 10 years. So was this a man crying out of shame for what he'd done? Or was it a man crying because, in his mind, he'd just done the only thing he felt he could do for his wife? The next major breakdown was about something much quieter and arguably far more intimate. The Worthy Memoir Support. October of 2023. Jada was out promoting her memoir, titled Worthy, a deeply personal account of her life, her marriage, and the private struggles she'd kept largely out of public view, even during her years hosting Red Table Talk. During a stop on her book tour in Baltimore, Will made a surprise appearance to support her. And instead of just standing beside her for a photo op, he actually read a passage from her memoir out loud, live, in front of the audience. As Will read her words back to her, he broke down. The moment became widely shared because of one specific phrase Will used to describe their marriage as a whole. He called it brutiful, a blend of brutal and beautiful. He went further, telling the crowd that Jada was the best friend he had ever had, and that he intended to show up for her for the rest of his life. Unlike the entanglement tears, there was no ambiguity here, no later clarification video. This was Will, standing in front of an audience, reading his wife's own account of her suffering, and being visibly undone by it. So why does this particular breakdown land so differently than the others? Maybe because, for once, the tears weren't happening in the middle of a public crisis. But the Worthy era wasn't the first time Jada's pain reduced Will to tears. Long before Red Table Talk, long before the Oscars, there were private moments, ones Will himself has since chosen to reveal. The breakdowns before the cameras. Here's where the story gets even messier, because according to Will's own retelling, some of the lowest emotional points in the marriage happened nowhere near a camera crew. Take the story of Jada's 40th birthday. Will has described throwing an elaborate documentary-style surprise celebration for her. The kind of extravagant gesture meant to be a grand romantic statement. Instead, according to Will, Jada told him it was the most disgusting display of ego she had ever witnessed. He has referred to that moment as one of the lowest points of their entire marriage. By his own account, he ended up crying uncontrollably afterward, blindsided by how badly the gesture had missed. Then there's an even darker chapter Will has spoken about, a stretch of time within the marriage when, according to him, Jada cried for 45 days straight. Will has described this period as one of profound despair for both of them, a stretch so heavy that he started keeping a diary just to process what was happening. These aren't viral clips. There's no meme, no freeze frame, no thumbnail. They exist because Will chose years later to talk about them himself, in interviews, in his memoir, in the ongoing project of trying to explain his marriage to the public in his own words rather than letting headlines or lawsuits do it for him. A $3 million lawsuit threatening to put him under oath over a friendship he may have already lost. A living arrangement that contradicts what she said just months ago. A marriage she said more than once she never actually wanted. And years of tears that trace all the way back to a red couch, a golden statue, and a bookstore in Baltimore. Whatever you make of Will Smith's tears, one thing is clear. Nearly 3 decades into this marriage, Jada Pinkett Smith has been at the center of almost every moment the world has watched him break. And in 2026, That story still isn't over.